good evening to you. This is First News. I'm Temba Ove. Mayors and chairpersons of a majority of Zimbabwe's 92 local authorities were elected into office today. The MDC-T had approached the High Court to nominate non-elected councillors to fill these positions in the main urban areas. Justice Francis Bere dismissed the application for failure to prove that the case was urgent. This means that MDC-T may proceed by way of filing a normal court application, but could not stop today's mayoral elections. In Harare, Bernard Manyenyeni is the new mayor, while his deputy is Kambuzuma councillor Thomas Mazuva.
Swear that I'll serve Harare City Council well and truly in the office of the mayor, will uphold the Constitution and all other laws of Zimbabwe, and the bylaws, rules, standing orders, and resolutions of the Harare City Council. It's a real privilege to be asked to be mayor of the capital. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special city. It's a great honor that you've chosen an ordinary Zimbabwean to be its mayor. I take that honor with a lot of gratitude.
In Bulawayo, the MDC-T councillor for Ward 3, Martin Moyo, is the new mayor, and his deputy is Gift Banda.
Gift Banda?
You have entrusted upon me the onerous task of leading this city of Bulawayo as its erstwhile mayor. Thank you ever so much.
President Robert Mugabe will tomorrow open the first session of the 8th Parliament, where he will set the legislative agenda for the first session. The MDC-T has threatened to boycott the event in protest at what they term the stolen election. In Mdare at the weekend, MDC-T president repeated his rejection of the polls and dismissed calls for a change of leadership in his party.
I want to give you my personal commitment. But as long as I have got fire in the belly to fight this struggle, I'll be there with you.
The government of Zimbabwe has paid its first external compensation to white farmers, many of whom were forcibly evicted from their land between 2000 and 2008. The payment followed a ruling in favor of an elderly Zimbabwean farmer, Mr. Mike Campbell, and 77 other farmers by the SADC Tribunal in November 2008 that President Robert Mugabe's land reform program was illegal and racist. The Zimbabwean government refused to acknowledge the SADC decision, and the tribunal then issued a fine to the government to be paid to the farmers. When the SADC tribunal was suspended and the Zimbabwean government refused to pay the fine, the farmers, assisted by a South African farming organization, AfriForum, then pursued the matter in the South African courts. After 4 years and many appeals, the court finally ruled that a property in Cape Town belonging to the Zimbabwean government must be auctioned and the proceeds given to the farmers. This was due to happen today, but at the last moment, the Zimbabwean government stepped forward and paid the expected house price into a trust for the farmers. I asked Willie Spears, legal spokesperson for AfriForum, what this means for Zimbabwe's land reform program and the up to 4,000 farmers who were evicted.
Most certainly. This case dates back to 2007 when Mr. Mike Campbell, who is deceased since then, has passed away, went to the SADC tribunal in order to try and save his farm from being taken by the Zimbabwean government. He went to the SADC tribunal, which is an international court of law that was instituted in the Southern African region in order to enforce human rights issues where domestic government failed in that regard. And he succeeded in front of the SADC tribunal back in November 2008 when the tribunal ruled firstly that the land reform process of Zimbabwe was illegal, that it was racist, and that it had to be reversed in the sense that farmers who have been deprived of their property should be reinstated or alternatively be compensated for the taking of their properties by the Zimbabwean government. Unfortunately, the Zimbabwean government refused to adhere to any aspect of the SADC tribunal ruling, and that urged Mr. Campbell back in June 2009 to approach the SADC tribunal again and to ask for an order of contempt of court, which was granted, and the tribunal then also granted a punitive cost order. Well, needless to say that Zimbabwe still refused to adhere to the punitive cost order, and that urged us to carry on with a legal process here in South Africa. We approached the North Gauteng High Court. We applied for the registration and enforcement of that SADC tribunal ruling in South Africa, and we attached the property belonging to Zimbabwe in Cape Town. Zimbabwe then approached the court with an application to rescind this whole process. They failed in their efforts, and they then appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and after failing, they also appealed to the Constitutional Court, and they failed once again. And the final milestone in this whole process would have been the auction of this property of Zimbabwe in Cape Town. And the auction was actually due to take place at 10 o'clock this morning. Well, we are very happy to say that Zimbabwe has finally conceded to our actions. And on just before close of business Friday afternoon, Zimbabwe made a payment of just under 200,000 rand, which is the amount of the punitive cost order that was granted by the SADC tribunal. So for the first time in history, Zimbabwe has actually acceded to one of the orders granted against them by the SADC tribunal. As far as we're concerned, that's a very, very important milestone. It has shown that we are on the right track and that we are doing the right thing in enforcing the law against the Zimbabwean government. We will explore the other avenues available to us, and obviously this is still just a drop in the ocean compared to the losses that were suffered by those farmers. But the next step would obviously be to exercise ways of enforcing orders for compensation against the Zimbabwean government to make sure that those farmers who have been deprived of their property and deprived of their livelihood be compensated in some way or the other. So that process will carry on.
I was just going to ask that, Mr. Spears, that what does this mean for Zimbabwe's land reform program and the up to 4,000 farmers evicted?
The important thing is, firstly, that the Zimbabwean land reform process was found by an African Court of Human Rights to be a racist, illegitimate, and irregular process. That's the first thing that was found. The second important thing is that the South African Constitutional Court actually endorsed this finding by the SADC tribunal, and it also found that the findings by the SADC tribunal is enforceable in South Africa, being one of the member countries of the SADC region. So as far as we're concerned, it means that regardless of what Mr. Mugabe and regardless of what the government of Zimbabwe says, the land reform process in Zimbabwe is an illegitimate, unlawful, and irregular process, and it needs to be rectified in some way or the other. We will keep on putting pressure on the Zimbabwean government. We will engage with the Zimbabwean government if need be, but we need to make sure that justice prevails and that the people who have been deprived of their property is being compensated some way or the other.
The High Court will tomorrow deliver judgment on the 28 MDC-T activists who are accused of murdering a policeman in May 2011. One of the activists, Rebecca Mafikeni, died in prison earlier this year. In international news, there's been another apparently random shooting in the United States this afternoon. Initial reports suggest that several people are dead and others wounded after an unidentified gunman opened fire in Washington, D.C. It is believed 2 law enforcement officers are amongst those shot, and the shooter was being sought in a building housing the Naval Sea Systems Command headquarters. A Washington police spokesman said those shot included a District of Columbia police officer, 1 other law enforcement officer, and 3 others. The spokesman said emergency personnel were tending to the victims. The Navy said in a statement the shooting took place at the heavily guarded headquarters where about 3,000 people work. Dozens of police and emergency vehicles surrounded the complex in southeast Washington.
Multiple shots being fired right now. We did hear that there's an officer down, so we don't know if this officer down is one of the 3 folks that we've heard that was shot. But again, just seconds ago we heard multiple shots being fired and then an officer down.
The Costa Concordia cruise liner, which ran aground in January last year, was gradually winched upright by a massive salvage operation today. The ship, which ran aground due to the captain's error with 4,000 passengers on board with the loss of 32 lives, was lying on its side on a rock shelf just outside the harbor mouth of a tiny Tuscan port. The 115,000-ton vessel is the length of 3 soccer pitches, and its recovery will cost $800 million. The salvage operation is an awe-inspiring feat of engineering and involves pulling the vessel upright with hundreds of cables and resting it on a specially constructed steel frame. Divers will then also search for the 2 bodies that were never recovered from the wreckage. In sports, the national cricket team beat Pakistan in the 2nd test at the Harare Sports Club on Saturday. The team's performance is the first win over the Giants from the Asian subcontinent in 15 years. Zimbabwe's 24-run win leveled their 2-match series with Pakistan at 1-1 after losing the first test. The win comes at the time when Zimbabwe has just re-entered the ICC test rankings for the first time since May 2007. Zimbabwe is now ranked 9th place after its historic win against Pakistan. And that ends tonight's news bulletin. On behalf of the team, I wish you happy viewing on First TV, your nation, your station.